on to everyone today. John is someone that over the years that when I hear him make presentations, I've heard a number of them. What just strikes me as someone who just is genuinely curious, a learning mindset about things in society, about how people think, about how people act, and it just oozes. So if you read his bio, you can see he's very, very accomplished. I'm not going to do that, but he's a very accomplished career. That he's talking about now and researching on, I think, is more important because our employees interact with us. It's how our think about us. It's about to people, and it's never been a more important topic right now. And I think ESG is a little bit of a culmination of all of that. But so I think we have all heard the Harris Poll is a very well-known brand. And I think we're just very, very fortunate to have its leader here today to talk to us. So John, I'm gonna turn it over to you, and I'm sure there's going to be tons of questions that pop out of this. I'm sure because I had a chance to go through the slide deck, and I know I had a bunch. So at the end of this presentation, or maybe even, I'm not sure how you'd like to do it, but I'm sure you're going to get some engagement, interaction with people because the data is that good. And I can tell you love this data, don't you? I could just tell it. You just love this whole concept. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hey, thanks, Walt. I'm really excited to be here, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm going to share my screen and jump right into this. I want to make sure you guys can see that. Somebody gives me a high sign. That look good? Great. Okay. Well, what I thought we might do in very much making this a very sort of informal sort of structure today, which is if you have some questions you want to stop and have a conversation, please just let me know and we can take it by section. But in the sort of salad bar of polling data that I've got this evening, I thought we'd kind of look briefly at the latest mood of the country from our Harvard Harris poll data from January, from the end of January. We'll also look at weekly polling from our COVID tracker. So Harris has put together since the beginning of the pandemic in March of 2020, all things COVID, all different types of perceptions on economic attitudes, public health attitudes, and I'm going to tap into some of that. Then I thought we'd go back in and look more closely at what's going on with American voters' perceptions of the economy, inflation, and stock market. We'll look at some culture and issues for business, just some interesting outside the C-suite sort of look at society and some things that you might want to think about as you look at how people are reacting to various social issues. And then lastly, we'll talk about the future of work. We'll deal into some work aspects of this as well. So let me get in and talk about the mood of the country. So the first thing you're going to see here quite sort of stoically is the fact that there's an increasing majority of voters that believe that the country is on the wrong track. This is significantly ticked up since July of 2021. You can see sort of right around June, July, actually June, we were at 39% wrong track in the red. That has now shot up 20 points to 59%. And what really concerns me as we look at this data is some of the softening in the upper right-hand corner there between Democrats and independents. If you see that, you can see just looking at the June data of 2021 right here, you can see that Democrats were 81% right track on the country. They're now down to 58. That's a 23-point decline. Same with independents, 44 to 28. That's a 16-point decline. So as you're looking for sort of administration support for the country, as an incumbent, neither of those Democrats or independents are even signed on. And obviously the situation's a lot worse with the GOP. Only 14% say it's on the right track. The other thing that we see is approval ratings. Same situation, actually identical numbers, a decline since June when the president was at the height of his honeymoon at 62%, now down to 39%, which is a 23-point decline as well. So the mood of the country and the president POTUS approval ratings are sort of moving in lockstep, both down significantly over 20 points in the last 6 months. I think what's also interesting in this chart, you can see in the dark blue and light blue are the strongly approves and somewhat approves. In that dark blue, look again at the June numbers from 33% strongly approved of the president's performance, now down to 18%. That's a significant erosion, almost half of his base points there, 15 points. And then from a corollary, up 17 points and strongly disapproved from June. So, really, again, sort of seeing a pretty sort of bleak picture at the moment. Again, the only good thing with polling is it's only what people think right now. But we did go back and look at the performance ratings of the president in our brand new data against a year ago when Trump was still in office, and President Trump in his last last month. And look at the numbers; they're pretty significant. You see, handling of the economy, President Biden is 21 points lower than President Trump. Stimulating jobs down 17 points at 41% approval. And then as you sort of scroll down there and you look at some basic things like administering the government, President Trump was at 49% in January 2021. And again, looking at that when we were sort of still right at the moment of pre-vaccine, and there was a lot of sort of a chaos sort of going on in the country, as you know, but comparing that 49% to 40% now approval for President Biden, 9 points lower than President Trump's approval rating. Same situation on reacting to coronavirus. He's now below President Trump's watermark at 44%, down 3 from him. And then new questions that we put in as things have evolved over the past sort of several months. We've added in dealing with violence and crime in the country, and also handling of Afghanistan and handling of inflation. Interesting on those last two, those are the President Biden's lowest approvals, right? And we'll get into that and unpack that a little bit more as we kind of go through this. So the first thing you need to understand, there's two things that matter right now in the country. This has been the same story that we've seen in our Harris poll and Harvard Harris poll data since the pandemic began roughly in March of 2020. Coronavirus has taken lots of mind space, and now what's happening is economy and jobs has slowly creeped up to sort of compete. That's a two-horse race on what are the most important issues facing the country. And even though coronavirus is still up 2 points, economy and jobs continue to hold strong and are building in momentum, particularly with regards to inflation that we'll get into. Also, just really interesting to look at immigration. This is always on the minds of Americans at 23%, healthcare behind that at 20%. And then sort of a few other things I think are just important to sort of look at there is look how low climate change is with respect to some of the other issues that face the country. So, really the dominant awareness right now is obviously on the coronavirus and the economy. So I thought what we do is go deeply into those two real briefly. So let's start with the pandemic. Our theme for it tonight is we're over it, but we're unable to escape it. And that's what we see in the data. We have asked this question in the Harris poll since the beginning of the pandemic with respect to the coronavirus. Do you think the worst is behind us in green, or the worst is ahead of us in orange? And what you can basically see is a high degree of optimism on the green line at 76% back in the spring of last year when we were reopening. And then obviously that steadily sort of sloped downward, particularly with the outbreak of Delta in our data, which sort of coalesced right around or coincided right around with Labor Day. So you can sort of see we've basically been on a roller coaster of emotions, right? We then saw the CDC reporting COVID cases stabilizing in the center of the chart, and whoops, there goes the optimism again. And then there was the Omicron break, and then whoops, it went back down again. Well, we're ticking back up. We're now at 59%, which is great, and it continues to sort of rise. It shot up 7 points from last week, so everybody feels like maybe we're out of the woods on Omicron. And also, interestingly, Omicron never got us that worried the way Delta did. If you look at the peak of Omicron, it was only in the low 50s versus the low to mid 60s with Delta. But we're still not back at that peak level of happiness back in June of 2021 at 76%. but it looks like we're heading in that direction. With that, we also ask a number of questions around sort of, we call this colloquially our fear chart. And the first thing you can see is that the new variants, being back in public, unemployment, those have risen a little bit this week, specifically unemployment, fear of losing one's job, which is the orange line. That shot up 8 points to 53% on the right-hand side. And then everything else sort of at the top there. I think it's significant just to understand that Americans are in this wait and see mode, right? Everything is sort of sitting in the low to mid 70s in terms of what they're concerned about. Most notably, fear of a new wave is the gray line, and fear of a new variant is the red line, both at sort of 69 and 71% respectively. So, what's happening here, and we'll get into this further, is hope and optimism, excitement that the worst is behind us, but a lot of sort of pragmatism and sensibility that we may not be completely out of the woods. And that's because of this Harris question. We asked, as new variants emerge, do you believe that the virus is now part of our daily life and it will last in some form? Or in the burgundy, do you think it will eventually be eradicated and no longer be a cause of concern? Well, 7 out of 10 Americans believe we're going to be living with this significantly, including 67% of unvaccinated people. And then we also are sort of practical and pragmatic, hopefully not fatalist, but believing that they're likely to be another serious variant again in the future. This is 83% top 2 box of very and somewhat likely, although that number has been going down steadily since January. It's down 4 points this week, but still roughly 8 out of 10 believe that, and including almost half somewhat likely believe that another serious variant could be around the corner. So what I would take from that is sort of tempered optimism, a sense that Americans are very anxious to get on with their lives and get back out there. But what's holding them back from full acceptance is sort of this understanding that there could be something else that comes at us. And with that, though, particularly with Omicron falling, and the fact that Americans didn't see it as significant of a threat, particularly because of the vaccine and boosting levels in America, even in our data among unvaccinated, they didn't think it was a big thing. They thought it was actually proof that the vaccines were ineffective when you look at our unvaccinated data. But be that as it may, what you're seeing here is that comfort with public activities are improving. And so basic things like visiting family or friends without a mask on the green line is now up to 77% of folks. And the ones that really jumped up were kind of hopeful for our business industry, right? Our travel and leisure. Stay in a hotel shot up 4 points to 72%. That's in the orange. Also flying, going for a dinner or drink indoors is that gray line right below it. That's up 2 points at 79%. And then other things like, taking public transportation, that's the gray line, that's at 55%. That's up 4 points. That is super important because we have not seen public transportation inch up very significantly in several months. And so that starts to say that returning to life, obviously a lot of people are back in the office, and that's creating maybe a little bit of sense of hope. And then also flying on a plane is up 4 points. But still only half, 57% of Americans in the very comfortable level. I should mention, as you look at this data, this is a scalar of how comfortable you are in doing these activities from 1 to 7. And what we've done is we've taken the 5, 6, 7 folks. These are the sort of leading edge, most comfortable folks. And you can kind of see that the optimism is definitely growing. And with that comes pent up demand. I think 2022 feels like 2021. I feel like I probably had this chart last year around this time, which is like, hey, you know what, we're getting vaccinated and let's go revenge spending. Let's go out and take a vacation. And clearly, again, that's right here in play. Hotel stays, these are what do you plan on purchasing? Hotel stays are significant, plane tickets, basically anything that gets us out of the house, right? Shoes and footwear, concert tickets, going out clothes, but less so things like athleisure and workout clothing at the bottom, or even work attire, which suggests that this is really sort of a get back out there sort of approach. And that's an important signal, because as we look at a lot of our other data, as we'll get into now, the mood on the economy, the mood on the personal financial situations is more sobering. So I feel as we kind of transition from this into the next section, there's definitely a thirst and desire for Americans to get out and have experiences, to get back out and reconnect with people. The demand for that is really strong. And that's set against a sobering reality that the financial situation is looking a little rocky. Lastly, this was some data that we had in Axios. This was in Mike's AM, I think, this past Monday. But we found sort of an interesting entrenchment, for the FDA approval of the Pfizer vaccine, which has since been sort of rescinded and held back. But it was basically 60% were likely of parents with children under 5 to vaccinate their child. 73% of vaccinated, but it was the opposite among the unvaccinated, 65%. So based on your vax status, we sort of likened to this to say that potentially, buckle up the PTA, this could be the next culture war in America over toddler vaccines, but that remains to be seen. Hey, one positive thing on this, maybe we could talk about too, is if you look at the numbers on the right, I feel like there's possibly a wait and see attitude happening here among quite pragmatic people. If you look at the numbers of women, particularly Gen Z, even millennial women, and then look at suburban, which is at 49%, and independent also in our data significantly goes upward. I kind of think that what is happening here is that these are suburban moms, independents, and they're sort of saying that, hey, there's not enough science yet on this. Obviously, the FDA has sort of stepped back right now and doing some more analysis, but I think they're kind of saying with Omicron going down, maybe I should just wait a little bit on this with our kids, which is sort of an understandable sentiment in the context of the news right now. So let's get into the economy. All right, so feeling bearish is the theme here. We see significant concerns, just like country on the wrong track, the economy tracks with that. 2/3 of Americans, almost 62%, believe the economy is on the wrong track. And again, you can kind of see, 37%, sort of 29% rather, right track, moving down. And what's significant is that pessimism, that red line going up on wrong track, is now up for 6 straight months. Basically, June was the end of the honeymoon and sort of the start with the problems with Afghanistan working its way into the supply chain issues, then manifesting itself into the inflation that was believed to be at the time transitory and now is sort of, become a cocktail for misery right now for the administration. This is sort of negative numbers. And kind of on a less sort of political question, we tend at Harris to see when you ask right track, wrong track, that tends to be an indictment on the current administration. And so people put on their blue or red hats. But here, this is a more sort of basic consumer confidence question. And same sort of pattern, 6 months of rising levels of cynicism about the economy, 63% wrong track. But what really matters is when you get into the macro and go to the micro, and you ask people about their own personal economy. So this question we ask, would you say your personal financial situation is improving or getting worse? Improving is the green line, getting worse is the orange line, and then that beige line is just as well off. And again, what you can see here is sort of, even though it's slightly ticked down a point over last month, you still have nearly half of people believing that their personal financial situation is not getting better. It's declining versus those who believe it's improving, which is only 25%. And those numbers are significant. If we look back to June of 2021, let's just focus on those who said their personal financial situation was improving. That is now down from 37% to 25%, a 12-point slide. So people are feeling it in their pocketbooks, they're feeling it at the gas pump, and we'll see that in just a second. Interrelated to these woes is obviously the turbulence in the markets, right? We've seen some significant attacks on the FANGs and the tech stocks, and that's created a lot of volatility over the past several weeks. And so we asked this question just last week or 10 days ago: which comes closest to your belief about the recent stock market declines among those who were familiar with it? And what you can see is that 53%, the majority of Americans, believe these declines could signify a coming recession similar to the late 1990s tech bubble, but still almost half believe that, hey, these recent declines are just normal fluctuations. And I think what's significant about that is what's changing is obviously inflation, as we'll get into this, the sort of portending of the Fed raising interest rates at least 25 basis points, and sort of the understanding that there's going to be a lack of easy money, I guess, is maybe the way to look at this. But I think it's interesting that the majority of Americans aren't just seeing this as a natural correction. They've got their radar up, and they're sort of skittish, worrying that this could be some similar sort of tech bubble. And then what we look, interestingly, into the data about how American voters and how consumers are reacting to this, the millennials are really the ones, and remember, they're the young families down to the cash strapped with student loans at the bottom end of that group, but they are most reactive to the market declines, and they're the ones that are doing a lot of planning of financial changes. So when we see the aggregate numbers, 55% are likely to cut back on spending. And you can see how these numbers pop with Hispanics and parents with kids under 18 at 61%, adjusting their financial plan. Almost more than half are going to do that at 52%. You can again look at the significant spike among millennials and even Gen Z. Eating out less, the same story. Skipping vacations, less so, but same story again with millennials bumping up. And so investing less in the stock market, 38%, but 52% with millennials. So we're going to stop, and maybe this is a great place, Lowell, at some point for us to get into a discussion about alternative financial instruments. But we have seen in our Harris data on investing in cryptos and NFTs that there's not only a generation gap. Older folks think cryptocurrencies are cryptic currencies. Young people think that they are a new alternative way to really building wealth creation in a financial system that they think is sort of set up against them. And interestingly, the same thing is happening with BIPOC audiences. We've seen, as you see at the bottom of this chart, although 32% of Americans, the general public, are going to invest in cryptos and NFTs, those numbers go up significantly. 21 points with millennials, 20 points with Black Americans, 18 points up with Gen Z, and 11 points up with Hispanic. We see a similar pattern also with the LGBTQ community. And one whole theory on this is that it is a far less frictionless financial investment system and provides the availability for people to get into this market and to become investors without the traditional institutional, whether it's systemic challenges, whether it's systemic racism or other financial barriers, social barriers that are put up on investors. Clearly, young people and people of color and LGBTQ are really interested in these financial assets. Sorry for taking that side road, but it's kind of interesting. Inflation. Big
John,
deal.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I'm still having internet issues, but a curious question that I have. It seems like there's a bit of a contradiction when we see some of this data, when we've got, when we've got an unemployment situation, which is everybody's looking for people, right? Everybody, they're changing jobs and getting raises. Is there a contradiction between the perception of how the economy is doing and how it's really doing, in a sense of statistically how it's doing? It seems like there's a contradiction there.
There is. Ordinary Americans do not feel the economic recovery that I think economists do when they look at, earnings, wages, when they look at, housing sales. All those things go up. But this is a little bit of income inequality. It's a little bit of clearly people perhaps maybe panicking a little bit and taking a negative view because of inflation. And when you get into the inflation, which I'll show next, it's really impacting ordinary Americans in a really challenging way. So yeah, I know, like definitely, record unemployment, low levels of unemployment. Companies are looking for workers, but people on average, don't feel that. They're feeling sort of a significant sort of pressure in their household budget. And that is actually driven by inflation, which is a good segue, Lowell. Inflation is really something that ordinary Americans feel. And the simple kind of thing that we look at in Harris is if you talked about unemployment, or employment, that's not a visible factor to most people. Like they don't interpret 7 or 8% unemployment in their lives unless they, are really directly connected to 7 or 8 of their friends out of 100 friends that don't have jobs. Far different situation with inflation. Inflation is super visible, it's omnipresent, and it is right there in your face for average folks on a daily basis. And so you see 90%, are very or somewhat concerned. And look at statistically, that's really interesting how high 55%, the majority of Americans are very concerned about inflation. And that includes 51% of Democrats, right? And that cuts across racial barriers and even ages. It obviously rises with age, with more investable assets, perhaps. But I think that's kind of interesting. And then look at this. The right-hand side, well, the left-hand side is good. Have you been impacted personally? If you take a lot and somewhat, you put it together, that's more than 2/3. That's 67% of Americans feel they've been personally impacted by it. And where do you feel it? Well, it's the 3 things that you see and you pay for every week or every month, which is groceries, fuel, and rent. That is the challenge that we're facing. And that is what is creating this backdraft on all these other numbers I've already presented about negativity with the economy. That inflation is just it's something that just causes them to seriously consider holding back on spending. And we see that, number one, that Americans believe that inflation is caused by and large by the supply chain shortages. So perhaps that's good news that once those get worked out, perhaps inflation will go down. The GOP has a different look at it. They kind of spike up a little bit on the US increasing its money supply. But what's really happening here is that it's impacting Americans' ability to save. So we asked, have the increasing prices in goods and services affected your ability to save this year? And again, pretty big numbers, 59%, including 31% definitely, are saying that that's really hampered their ability to saving, skewing higher among women, among millennials, and slightly higher, significantly higher actually among Black and Hispanic Americans. So with that, and back to this point about economic sort of cynicism and personal financial situations, people feeling like they're worse off, we asked this question: do you have more or less spare cash than you did a year ago? Again, with Harris, we always try to talk to people like you might be talking to them, in a diner in New Hampshire, rather than trying to talk in sort of economic elite terms. And so we just ask real basic questions, and more than half say they have less spare cash. Only 17% said they have more, and you can see how much that really hurts folks that are making under 100,000 household income. And then we asked sort of, have the rising prices of goods and services cause you to have less spare cash? And 6 out of 10 see a direct correlation between that, right? They say, yes, I have less spare cash because prices are going up. So if you put together that chart about gas, fuel and rent, which are super visible, people see them, every week, and then belief that they have less spare cash, that has caused a sort of a cynicism, number one, that something could be done about it in the short term. The majority of Americans are not confident that neither President Biden or the Fed will be able to keep inflation at bay. That's at 55 and 54%. But then look at this. When we ask them, okay, well, how should we get out of this? And we gave them 2 different choices. we said, which of two opposing viewpoints on inflation comes closer to your view? One, an expanding economy helps everyone, and it's okay if a little inflation comes along with that. Well, that's only a third. 2/3 of Americans say the contrary. They believe inflation and rising costs harm everyone in the country, and the government should cut back on spending and printing money in order to prevent inflation. So you'll see that as we get into the next section, that inflation is the elephant in the room. It's really scaring people and sort of holding people back from saving and spending. And that's my near-term concern about the recovery, continued recovery in the consumer economy, because this is driving those really low consumer confidence numbers that you're seeing from the Conference Board and from other places. And then obviously we asked them to pretend to be the Fed. How would you do this? And then, basically they're saying, I'd rather take an economy with slow job growth, but low inflation. Again, just how important that is. Lowell, anything you want to talk about there with the economy, or any open discussion before I go into the last two sections? I thought I'd talk about culture, some culture issues, and then we'll talk about the future of work.
It's just interesting how inflation crosses all boundaries, right? But we're also having Tom Barkin, the Fed president in Richmond next month. So I think the timing will be very good. We can talk about inflation with him.
And my view is nationally representative data of Americans, right? That's weighted for the population. So this is Main Street's view on all these issues, clearly not anyone else's, but this is just giving you a little bit of pulse of what ordinary people are thinking. So yeah, what I did here is select a few slides from this past month's Harvard-Harris poll and some of our COVID tracker and some of the data that we've been fielding at Harris, just over a range of social issues. And I thought it might be interesting for business to think about this in the context of mindfulness and how they might want to think about some of the major social shifts that are sort of happening in the country. So this is a little bit of a jeopardy on social issues, and they're going to bounce around little places, but I'm going to try to weave them together into a little bit of a theme. Number one, and I think this is really important, there is a sort of great quiet middle in the country that I believe is really open for compromise. And it might be, don't know if that's ever possible inside the Beltway, but these are sort of significantly interesting. And number one, there's a little bit of an incumbent effect on these numbers. Usually the incumbent gets knocked down a bit versus the challengers. But we asked, do you think the Democratic Party has gone too far to the left, not far enough to the left, or is it just about right? So I call this the Goldilocks chart. And the just about right is the gray. And I think the first thing that's important is the Republicans are up 10 points than the Democrats on just about right. Got that? 39 versus 29 in the gray. The second thing is too far to the left. The Democrats at 47% are 18 points higher than the Republicans at 32%, saying that they haven't gone far enough. So they're a little out of whack. And that follows with another sort of criticism where 2/3 of the voters say that President Biden should reach out to the middle versus rally the Democratic base. And so if you kind of put this together with some of the other data that both Mark and I have shared in various sort of forums over the past several months, and Mark's a real big proponent of sort of looking at this data through the centrist viewpoint. It's real interesting to see. I'm speaking to Mark Penn. This suggests, that there is room for compromise. There is more of a practical middle that the president might want to consider reaching out to. We saw in the Harvard-Harris poll data, for instance, that nearly 2/3 of Americans did not support Build Back Better because they thought it was too expensive. So if you thread that together with inflation and all the other things we've already talked about, there's just this belief that we need to be a little more reaching to the middle and a little more sensible and pragmatic. And so what I did is I took a couple of other social issues, very hot button social issues and sort of looked at it through that same framework to see if there were any themes. And we kind of see that in different, very important issues. On Roe v. Wade, which is out of our Harvard-Harris poll data, we ask, the court held that women had the right to have an abortion until the first 24 weeks of pregnancy. Do you think the Supreme Court should repeal Roe v. Wade entirely, leaving abortion laws to the states? That's 1/3. But look at 36% affirm RVW as is, and 24% make the date to have an abortion 15 weeks instead of 24, right? Which is a room for compromise. If you took that compromise, you would have 60%, which is sort of a significant majority, almost double of those who want to repeal it outright. And the same sort of theme on the right-hand side. If the Supreme Court cuts back Roe v. Wade from this time 24 to 20 weeks without requiring state law approval, would you favor or oppose that change? 54%, slight majority, but a majority would favor that. And the other question we asked is, if the court rolled back Roe v. Wade entirely, leaving all abortion laws to the states, would you favor or oppose? The opposite, slight majority, 54% would oppose that. So, taking an absolutely, benchmark alienating issue in our country and looking at that through sort of the lens of, is there a compromise to be made here, is just something of note. And other areas where we've come to the center is a major concern around crime in the country. We asked, do you think crime in the country is mostly under control or out of control? 70% of Americans believe it's out of control. And then we asked, do you support or oppose reducing funding for the police? 60% oppose that. That's only 24%, only less than a quarter that are all around defunding the police. And in fact, 2/3 of Americans actually want more police on the streets, even at the same time, while admitting that police reform is needed, right? Nearly half, 49%, believe reforms are needed, but 68% believe we need more police. So again, sort of a centrist view on some of these issues, perhaps. And then this one on a health tax, you might have read that Quebec, and I've got some new Canadian trucker data in the field right now. I'll share that with you guys when I get it out. But in Quebec, they recently proposed a mandatory health tax to be paid for all voluntary unvaccinated residents to set off the financial burdens that accrue if they seek COVID intensive care. How much would you support similar legislation if that was adopted in the US? 56% of Americans would support that, including surprisingly 23% of unvaccinated Americans. So that to me kind of said there's room for maintaining our freedoms and being taxed for those freedoms. And so, just some interesting areas that aren't always so black and white. When you take off, Fox News and CNN on two sides, and you sort of say, like, what would the network be that might report some of this quiet stuff in the middle? You start to see some interesting stories. And then this one is obviously ripped from the pages of today's social wars. But when we look at the Spotify issue, we asked two questions. Thinking of the Neil Young and Joe Rogan dispute, who do you agree with more? Joe Rogan in the blue, and that argument, as put to our respondents, one artist shouldn't be able to call out the censorship of another. All artists are entitled to equal freedom of speech, versus the green with Neil Young, that says artists should be able to use any of their influence they have to raise awareness for issues they believe are important. And they go on to cite, as we did in the question, that it's alleged that Joe Rogan is spreading misleading information that could harm the public health. Well, look at those numbers. Number one, Spotify users of Spotify, 55% side with Rogan over Young, but it's a little more complicated than that, right? Look at Gen Z, 59% go with Mr. Young, And then you look at boomers, they're kind of the highest number. Perhaps they remember Neil Young more than any of the rest of us, and they're rocking in the free world with Mr. Young. But it's not an easy issue, clearly. But you could see in this sort of both sides of the debate. And what's happening here is that this consternation and this conflict is actually sort of alienating some users. We asked, because of this controversy on the right, do you intend to do any of the following? 6 out of 10 said roughly do nothing, but there's sort of a significant group, 28%, that would either consider switching music streaming services or canceling their subscription. A small number there. But again, it just shows you the dangers in sort of business models that are sort of courting this type of conflict. And it's obviously very much a no-win sort of situation. But kind of looking at this data, I'm sure Daniel Elk is looking and siding with the Spotify users and his base first and foremost, while realizing that no company wants to be in the middle of these types of cultural debates. But again, that's a little bit of a theme on sort of some of the centrist views and the fact that we can look at things from sort of different views and sort of, I thought that was kind of interesting. So I'll go into the last section, and I think this will give us a lot of time to hopefully have a chat about what we're looking at in terms of overall observations from the data I've shared. But this is, I'm really excited about. This is some brand new data on the labor market, on returning to work, on workplace values, and some really interesting new data on working in the office and what we've learned from working from home. And some pretty interesting things, I think, but you guys be the judge. Okay, so number one, we asked this question last week in a survey with Bloomberg, and it's quite startling. Have you ever done these things in your professional life? And clearly, more than half have asked for a raise or promotion. But the big headline in this chart is on the right-hand side, that there are 61%, more than 6 in 10, believe that going and getting another job offer for the sole purpose of receiving a pay raise at their current employer is ethical. 61%, and those numbers really bump up among millennials and Gen Z, including the fact that nearly half said that if they were to take another job, they might be more likely in getting that interview to move on. Sorry, speaking of the past, had they done this, they would have been, they actually took another job. So going out and looking, they believe it's ethical, and they believe it also often leads to switching jobs. So that's one side of the debate, which is a real dilemma for employers and perhaps some questionable behaviors of employees. But on the employee side, they say, you know what, the most important thing for me, 8 out of 10 workers, these are among a survey we just did with American Staffing Association, 8 out of 10 workers consider professional development and training offerings to be important when accepting a job. But less than half of those workers believe their current employers are offering those professional development and training opportunities. And I've been doing this a long enough time to know that in any economic downturn and any sort of disruption, a lot of really valuable investment in people get often cut. And I think that's what you're seeing in this. You're seeing employers, in a strong labor market, employees rather, in a very strong labor market, questioning the investment that their employers are putting into them. And so you're sort of seeing this behavior about going out and testing the market and trying to either get a raise or potentially find another job. You'll see that as we get into some of the other sort of data of what they want and what they're looking for. But these two charts to me kind of suggest that there's a little bit of a broken contract and not real clear, authentic communications happening between employers and employees. So now we sort of segue into what employees are looking for. And it's interesting, some things are changing. This is a brand new survey we released last week with Franklin Templeton in some thought leadership that we do with them. And it's interesting, 2/3 of workers say they have reassessed what they want from their employers, and 44% have considered leaving or have left their jobs in the past year. So strong market, unsatisfaction with current employers is leading to sort of a sense of mobility and improving one's working conditions. And so then on the right, we ask, well, what are you looking for? And you're going to see this theme play out, the importance of flexibility. This is among Gen Pop on the green, but they're looking for flexible working hours at 50%, flexibility to work from home, competitive salary is the largest at 61% in the Gen Pop, competitive health insurance coverage. This is really interesting. This has become a major bargaining chip for employees as they're shopping around, and they're savvy enough to understand that health insurance coverage is actually worth its weight in gold, even compared to competitive salary. So that number has continued to be sort of ticking up in our Harris poll data. And just a lot of other things to sort of unpack here, but look at the Gen Z. They would rather take flexible working hours in the gray at 40% than competitive salary at 30%. So you have some significant changes in generational attitudes towards work. And I'm not necessarily certain that employers are caught up with some of these significant changes, both demographically and also racially, as we'll talk about, in gender in just a second. So just a couple more charts, but this is sort of in the spirit of going back to work. We started to ask questions. If it were up to you, would you, and this is among employed professionals, work from home, 36%, work from the office, 31%, hybrid of home and office at 33%. So sort of roughly a third, a third, a third. What's important in that is sort of, if you take work from home and hybrid of home office, that gets you to 69%, which is basically people saying flexibility is really important. And I want to have that option to be able to, to go to work, but also to be able to have my time at home. And I think, again, what's kind of interesting, these numbers, Gen Z are the most likely to want to have some time in the office. They want the hybrid the most. They and boomers, interestingly enough, but they really miss the socializing and they want that flexibility. But look at this, as you go a little bit deeper in this, we asked some trade-off questions to these employed professionals. We said, you know what, which location do you think is better for each of the following outcomes related to your career? And these are among people that are currently working remote or hybrid or have been during the pandemic. And so clearly the office at 48% drives career advancement, and that bumps up with younger folks. That's obviously important to Gen Z at 53%. Same sort of story with career performance. But then look down to the bottom, work-life balance, 56%, including 61% of women believe that working from home is offering that significant work-life balance and, importantly, critically, mental health. Look at, again, 58% general public of professionals rather, and 63% of women. So we kind of pulled that thread a little bit more. We wanted to understand that sort of trade-off between sort of career and what that gives you in the office versus like what you might miss or what you might benefit by working from home. And so we looked at among the women, just specifically the women that chose career advancement, less than half of them are willing to sacrifice their mental health, right? So those that are very willing, we asked, how willing are you to sacrifice your mental health in favor of work-life balance or advancing, in favor of advancing your career? 59% agree with that statement. And then 48% of women, so nearly half of them are only willing to sacrifice their mental health for career advancement. So again, that sense of balance is really important. And then when we go back to locations, it's really interesting. Most would actually give up the office benefits of mentoring and camaraderie in order to have that remote flexibility. We asked the question sort of straight up, if you had to choose the professional benefits, only 39% said mentoring and team camaraderie versus the flexibility and independence that comes with remote work. And it's really interesting. Gen Z, they're at 60%, even though they really want to be in the office for that socializing. So flexibility, hybrid really means a lot to everybody, but it really means especially more to women and BIPOC women. And this is where the data to me gets like super interesting. So first of all, remote workers are happier than their office counterparts. We've been home for 2 years, and even though we might be sick of our kids and zooming from home, we do really feel happier. And if you can cross over these numbers, bear with me. But we asked the question on the right, which of the following best describes how you feel about working remotely in the long term? So we're asking, like, you've had this experience, what do you think about in the long term? 46% said, happy, I enjoy working remotely, and I would enjoy doing so in the long term. Again, look at how those numbers pop up 6 points at 52% of women. Then cross over to the other side. Same question asked among those working that are already back working in the office, that happiness declines by 26%. So they're not as happier working in the office, and women are definitely not as happy at 15%. So those are significant differences. But now let's look at the success question, because that's sort of success, productivity, that's always been sort of the fulcrum here. You know, people have said, well, yeah, sure, it might be better for your life balance and, you know, your happiness, because you can do your Peloton in between meetings and all this other stuff, spend time with your kids, but you're not as productive. Well, workers don't see it that way, quite interestingly. In fact, 26% feel working remotely that they're successful, they're able to accomplish more work goals, in other words, be more productive. And that's at about the same level of productivity on the right, on that top bar at 28% of working in person is more efficient. So, you know, people have got down a system, you know, and they believe that there's sort of equal levels of productivity and more happiness. And then the other issues definitely sort of trail off, but I thought on those 2 points of debate, I thought that was kind of interesting. Now here in the last 2 slides where it gets super interesting, then I'll close this up with my point or my sort of hypothesis on what you might want to take from this. So remote work is really, really effective and sort of enjoyed by women and BIPOC workers, and especially BIPOC women. And so look at these. And if you think about the traditional structures of working in an office, which, sorry, at times can be very pale, stale, male, right? In the circa 2019 format of sort of, you know, not being able to share your ideas freely rather, because of hierarchy or stature or being interrupted. Look at those numbers, right? Working from home, like, you know, among those, you know, who are working remote home, but what are you most likely to feel the following? 7 out of 10, including 3/4 of Hispanic and Black workers, believe they're able to speak more freely. So we're removing the physical bias in a virtual setting, right? Also able to speak without being interrupted, 70%. Happy with my work, 64%. Even almost equal levels of feeling like they're being heard and respected by leadership, even though they're not in the office. And again, look at how these numbers all pop, particularly among women and BIPOC women. So, you know, one thesis that sort of emerged in this, we got interested in this data, and Libby Rodney, my chief strategy officer, and I, we do a Friday morning weekly podcast called America This Week on LinkedIn at 10 a.m. where we kind of talk about all these issues. And so we kind of got into this, but what's interesting, we went back into the field and kind of pulled on this a little bit more. And we said, okay, take working from home and working from the office, and let's understand, how do you feel, right? How do you honestly feel as an employee? Because businesses always tell us, we want you to be your whole self, right? We want you to come and have dignity at work and feel happy and productive and do your best work. Well, look at that, working from home. People, particularly boomers and women, jump up, but feeling more relaxed, more happy, more self-confident. Self-confident is super interesting. And I think that's connected to the previous chart. Now, with that comes some downsides, feeling a little bit more lonely, but 2/3 also believe they feel more personally fulfilled. And then again, the numbers of women and BIPOC women pop up on these questions of feeling energized, successful, engaged, and even equal levels of ambition. So what comes with the cost of feeling lonely and potentially distracted at times is sort of potentially outweighed by some of the benefits of feeling like your career is progressing and that you feel more confident and more happy and able to be heard and able to be recognized and listened to, which is some of our other data that we sort of see in this part of the study. So I'll do the last two charts here. They don't necessarily want to go back, especially BIPOC and women. They're willing to go back in a hybrid setting, but full office, there's a lot of anxiety related to that. And these all become these performative behaviors of sort of pre-circa 2019 office life that has been the experience for women, particularly BIPOC women as well, about having to dress for the office, having to engage in small talk, other things less important, forgetting how to socialize, not necessarily being around coworkers that you necessarily get along with, having to give presentations, et cetera. But I think that, the performative behaviors that are sort of eliminated in a virtual setting is definitely creating some flexibility and building confidence in some of our workers. And then lastly, what's happening with this is 4 in 10 really fear, this is everybody, but again, particularly women and younger folks really fear that they're going to lose their flexibility when they go back from home. So I'm going to leave it there, but I just wanted to kind of tie this last little point together is that, if you think about DEI initiatives, they're so important in companies. Companies are scrambling. We also know that in a virtual format, a work from home format, one of the benefits has been is we've been able to open our aperture on talent, right? We've been able to sort of get people, really smart people from all over the country, sometimes all over the world. And that in turn has been related sometimes to our ability to really do a better job on our DEI initiatives. So my one watch out for business is in your rush to bring everyone back to the office, look at this data kind of carefully, because I think what your workers are telling you, the ones you really value, you want to hold on to your women professionals, your BIPOC women professionals, your BIPOC professionals, you want to improve your DEI, they are feeling like the culture is at home. They can do a good job and they can feel this connection to colleagues in a remote setting or a hybrid setting. And so I just think, trying to address and fix some problems about getting people back in the office could undo some other gains that they may not realize that they've already sort of gathered. So that's a quick look at, maybe not so quick look at all our data, and Lowell, I'll open it up for a chat and observations.
Yeah, I think we open it up for questions. I think probably people have them, but I'll just start off like I always do with one, and then we'll go from there. Can you hear me okay, John? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. The first question, just around, do you really think this is a human resource revolution, this time period we're in? And is it something that's always been there and it's just been unearthed by the pandemic, or did the pandemic really kind of create this revolution?
I missed the first part of that. Human resources.
Just are we really in a human resource revolution?
Yeah, I think we are. And I think both of those things are right. I think, the experiment of working from home, which would have never happened, right, without COVID, has actually had some unintended beneficial consequences, unintentional benefits for professionals. And so, I'm a huge fan of believing that HR, I think, is the innovation center of the 21st century. I've talked about this for a few years because I wrote a book several years ago, I think when I had hair, called The Athena Doctrine, which looks at the rise of feminine values in leadership. And back in 2013, I was talking about this, that, not only are we missing a valuable human capital, we also found that the best, most modern leaders had feminine qualities, men and women. And so when you go back to HR, I think there's an incredible opportunity. Imagine companies that need to compete on culture, need to compete on innovation. They need to create breathtaking products. They need to have broader viewpoints on their consumers. HR should be at the center of all that. And in a very prosaic way, in a traditional way, HR has often not been put in that sort of strategic function. I'm generalizing wildly, but the excitement of HR to recognize, what they could do beyond just, DEI initiatives, but how you employ all that DEI and those perspectives and that capital into a company, I think is just a massive competitive advantage that you're going to see coming forward, particularly in a remote work setting where the access to talent is everywhere, or hybrid rather.
Very good. So we'll open it up for questions. You may have to.
I have a question. Can you speak to your base or the demographic of the base for your data?
And let me just say before you do that, I think, Angela, that's you, but would each of you that are asking questions just identify yourself, who you are, who your company is, and what industry you're in? I think it'd be just helpful for John and for everybody else. I want everybody to get to know each other.
Sure. My name is Angela Prentice. I'm a government president of a company. We're government contractors in the IT space.
Hi, Angela. Yes. So all the data I've shared is weighted to the demographics of the American population. So that's weighted for race, for age, for income, education. And so everything we're looking at is a representative impact of adults 18 plus in America. And obviously in Harris surveys, we would create different samples for different types of projects. For some of the data I shared with you was among employed professionals related to that last section on the working data. So we would always have a specific data set, but again, it always comes back to representing the actual population of professional workers in America.
Okay, thanks for that. And thanks for your presentation, by the way. But my question really had to do more with how you go about collecting the data or identifying sources for that.
Oh, sure, of course. Yeah, so this is all online data. So the Harris Poll, we work with various firms, and we've got a very strict sort of code of looking at how to eliminate data fraud online. But this is all done specifically with online sample. And that allows us not only the ability for speed, but also we go in and we oversample to make sure that we are reaching places where there may not be Wi-Fi access or broadband to make sure that, again, we have every aspect of our populations covered that represent America. But this is online data.
I have a question. Thank you. First of all, let me lower my hand. John, Steve Robbins with the law firm. Can you hear me okay?
You have your hand up, please.
Steve,
you have your hand up, please. Yep.
Why is that? Okay. Steve Robbins with Lurcher and Brewer.
You have your hand up, please. Yep.
Is there an echo? Okay.
Yes, just keep going, Steve.
Steve
Sorry
Robbins.
about that.
Okay, and I'm saying this is not an echo. I'm just repeating myself. Steve Robbins with Lurcher and Brewer. We're a law firm here in Bethesda, Maryland, and I'm a former chair of the chamber. And let me just say before I ask my question that I thought your presentation was really amazing. The data, the slides, the amount of material you covered was so interesting, and I can't thank you enough for doing it and presenting this to the chamber. So thank you very much. There is one thing you said that I am really curious about, because at a law firm, even though I think we are doing very well at trying to hold our people together and keep them not only occupied either remotely or on site and maintaining, the buzzword during the pandemic obviously has been culture, which is critically important. And we're focused totally on culture and how to maintain and keep the culture that we've had for 70 years. And although it has evolved, as the law firm has evolved. And the one thing that you said that I thought, well, there were two things related to culture that I'd like to get your impression, because you're the first person I've ever heard say this, which is that that culture can be preserved and actually expanded and made better by working remotely, as opposed to bringing people back into the office and preserving those touchable relationships where people are working and synergizing together and collaborating and the like. And that's just not the experience I think that the real world is having in terms of at least understanding that, and how that also relates to the comment that you made about the importance of also focusing on DEI and making sure that is truly a important mission in each firm, and how you advance DEI opportunities and stressing a remote environment as opposed to trying to get people back together.
Yeah, no, Steve, I think you're raising a really good point, and I'll slightly backtrack, but not very much. I'm talking about hybrid driving culture, and most of the employers that I'm talking to, they really want people back in the office. And I'm saying that the argument for hybrid is very important, because the folks that you really want to have in your company, they really value working from home. And so, what I fear is that the pendulum is going to swing the entire different way. The financial services company, it's like, if you're not here, you're not working here, that kind of thing. They're really going to miss a mark on their culture. But I will go back and say, the companies have all this jargon around bring your whole self to the office. Well, that's impossible, particularly for women and BIPOC women and men, and and all kinds of people, for various reasons, feel like they have to conform to a lot of male structures and performative behaviors that are, frankly outdated. And so I think what this pandemic taught us was that there's significant culture that is sort of created at home, and that is an argument ultimately for hybrid. Back to that chart, that 2/3 would take hybrid and work from home. And again, your whole self, a lot of people are saying my whole self is at home. I feel better. I'm more confident. I'm happier. And yes, I do miss the office and all that data. Women still want to go back to the office. It's not that they don't, but they don't want to go back 9 to 5, doing the commute, doing the same thing that they did before.
So with that explanation, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we have embraced a hybrid model as well, and we think it's made us a better firm, and people are happy having that option of working remotely and also coming into the office. So I understand where you're coming from now when you're talking about a hybrid model as opposed to forcing people to come back, 5 days a week and abandoning a remote work environment. I think that is a big mistake. So I would agree with you.
And the two things there, across the board, everybody wants flexibility, even more than money in some cases. And the second thing is, particularly women and BIPOC women are super happy in a work from home. They feel more energized, more confident, at least as they're telling us. So that's all I'm concerned about, is that companies are going to miss that as they bring everyone back to the office. And I'd also say they should not repeat past mistakes. They should learn from this data and about how people feel at home, and figure out how they could replicate some of the in-office dynamics that make people feel like they don't feel valued, they're not heard, they're not listened to, and they don't feel energized.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Steve.
Ironically, John, a lot of companies went to, before COVID happened, to getting rid of offices and all this shared space, and you don't have a desk anymore. And I was talking to somebody that works for one of those companies. It says, go back to what? They eliminated my office. I don't have a desk. I don't have a place to put a picture of my kids. What's the point? Congratulations, management. You made it a place I never want to set foot in again. Now, everybody didn't do that. Some people, brought in ping pong tables and beer dispensers. So yay for them. But, I thought it was interesting, because I got an earful from somebody recently about, everybody's going back, and then they're going back to the offices, like 15-20% of the people are there, and they're, they just go pick things up and drop things off. And it's like, nah, they don't want to be there. And it has a huge implications for, a lot of other things, other systems, like our transportation system is relying on ridership of people going to the office, particularly feds. And that's an issue for WMATA, which is not what you're here to talk about, I realize. But all of these things, are going to have big impacts on financial models. people who ride to get to an office, well, if they're not doing that, then that financial model doesn't work for that sunk infrastructure cost that we have in our region. That affects our economy. So there's just a lot of pieces here about human behavior and how it's going to, change a whole lot of other things.
Absolutely.
Maybe there's a chance for people to revise those offices again and make them fun.
I just have one question. Cynthia Grissom from WorkSource Montgomery, and of course we're in the workforce business, and I have to hire people just like everybody else out there. And it's funny, I don't know if this is a generational thing, but you have it in your presentation, so I thought I would ask. I did have a person who joined us, and we were asking for ideas because, of course, I consult on retention strategies and things for businesses, and I'm always looking for, okay, how do we combat all this poaching and hefty bonuses and businesses that can't quite compete with other businesses on some of these things? And someone had mentioned this unlimited time off, and I thought, well, practicality wise, how does unlimited PTO work? Or how would you, I don't even know what that means. So if you can elaborate a little bit on that, that would be great.
Specifically, Cynthia, what around the generational? Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this directly answers your question, but I feel like companies and leaders have to, all right, let's put it this way. They have to adopt the 38 Special Hold On Loosely song. Is anyone old enough like me to remember that song? Managers have to hold on loosely. I mean, you guys have been listening to me for 45 minutes, drone on. And how many people have you seen walk past me? I don't know, 1, 2. Most of our staff are all over the place. We've had young people relocate down to Austin, Texas. Others have gotten married and they wanted to find more affordable housing, so they're in Denver. And so we have very much in two things. We've improved our DEI. I think we've significantly improved our talent by opening up and getting rid of a lot of those rules that were very, in my mindset, in 2019. And so I think that's what you're seeing in this data is like, give them flexibility. And to, I think to Steve's point, it doesn't mean that they're going to be 100% remote, although, some companies are doing that, like Slack and others. It's more about the optionality. How do you give employees the flexibility to live anywhere, but perhaps you need them in the office 10 days a month, and that's on their dime to get there, but we don't care where you live, just be there. I mean, I've heard that proposed by a client. There's probably lots of options. I think the point is employers can't set these set rules anymore, at least not right now in a strong market. It's more about coming to terms. And as I said in the theme of a lot of those slides, compromising. What's the compromise that you could do that's going to work for people's lives and also for the company?
I have a quick question, John. This is Murali Kalavapudi, Envirosys Technologies, a small company. I've been consulting for 40 years. Things have changed so much over time, but the one convention that changed it is remote versus at work or on-site. So I'm more tuned to everybody asking me, hey, do you want to come and work here? I say, no, remote is possible these days. So especially in the federal sector, what I see, and this is a very good point you brought out, HR has to change a lot. Everybody who wanted me from my previous workplace in a serious role, and they said, no, we'll take you full time. And I say no, because there's more opportunity, there's more options for consulting independently, and I can cut it down. Plus, the downside is with the technology race and trying to move forward, the skills are low. So for those who are flexible, there's an element of overburdening the individual with more work at fixed hours, and that's been a problem. I do see that. The other downside, and HR also has to look at it, is job protection for those on continental US. If they want a special skill set, there's always somebody who can provide that, particularly in the quasi-government and private sector. So that's probably an impact. What do you think?
No, I think your points are really well taken. And I also think that the sort of the values that you kind of espouse are very much Gen Z values. We talk about it. Gen Z wants this flexibility, and they also want like sort of freelance. They want to be doing multiple things. You know, in the hybrid model in Hollywood, if you have hyphens, you're powerful, right? An actor is one thing, but if you're an actor, producer, director, you become Tom Hanks or Oprah. And that's how young people are looking at their careers. And that's why they're moving around so much, is they're trying to gather lots of different perspectives and experiences. And so we're experimenting. This is just Harris talking, but we're experimenting now with sort of more part-time, sort of the Airbnb model of employees being able to either come in and do extended projects for some specific needs. We're also looking at people doing some job sharing. We were really, really, really proud to see one of our top analysts, Fume Abe, appear on Stephen Colbert. He's a comedian, and he runs around New York and goes and does all the comedy shows at night when he's not crunching data. And he was on Stephen Colbert last week. So I think what you're saying about HR and about just this evolution connected to our conversation that we had with Cynthia just a second ago is absolutely like the HR needs to get back out into the real world. They need to study the new values, particularly of younger workers, of workers of color. And you're seeing some great examples of that about, I think it was IBM dropped college requirements and what that's done to their workforce and how that's energized them. So just maybe reducing some of the shackles and coming out and being more flexible with opportunities could be a really interesting way to improve talent. Agree with you completely.
Well, I think, John, we've kept, I think we have one more question. I don't know if you can hear me. I'm having all kinds of internet problems. So Gigi, you might have to take over. You don't mind?
I can hear you. I see a hand raised. Feezy, I see your hand up with Montgomery College.
Thank you so much, Gigi. So yes, Feezy Halim. I'm with Workforce Development and Continuing Education, and I honed in specifically on the issue that you raised about professional development and the desire for many of the new job seekers or changing job employees, that they really want employers not only to be able to see their worth currently, but offer them opportunities for enhancement in their career. This used to be something, and you mentioned age. So yes, I think I'm in the same generation you are. And, it used to be a time when you could start at a lower level in a particular organization and feel as if there was a way to move up. But it seems that many people nowadays feel they have to move. They have to leave in order to get that same level of opportunity. So what do you feel are the trends or the opportunities, not only for businesses, but businesses to work with academia to be able to reinforce that if you want continuity, if you want employee retention, if you want to be able to offer those types of things to your staff, how should the development or the partnership evolve?
Well, I think you're touching on some really important things. And one, this mobility is so incredibly important, particularly the younger workers. We do a lot of work with young people with the CDC on mental health and wellness, on their attitudes during the pandemic. And sort of between ages of 16 to 24, there's transitional values that we all had, right? Recklessness, vanity, all these other things that we did to sort of get ourselves through pimples and into the labor market. But the core values are things that endure. And the core values that we're seeing with young people are clearly things that are driven by existential concerns over the climate. Very much, we describe them as a Ferrari in the garage. When you talk to young people, they feel their lack of mobility has basically been interrupted. And if you think about, just go back in your own life and imagine SATs and exams and thinking about your future and your first job, those feelings are so magnified and amplified. And then to have masks and remote schooling and people, they basically feel like they're stuck. And so, what I'd be saying to employers is that you're going to create some significant relationships with colleges if you can understand that dynamic. And so are there ways to reach down and create more flexible internships? I mean, I can't tell you how many requests I get for internships just because people feel like they haven't matriculated, they haven't gone their normal path. They feel like they're falling behind. And so, ways that businesses could go in and reach down into the colleges and do more longer term projects. Again, this testing of things, young people are so open to that, taking a beta test and a project and putting people together now with virtual formats so that they're getting experience and employers are getting access to some of the smarties that you have at Montgomery College, that might be future employees right around the corner. I think all those kind of opportunities are there. And I'm sure an HR expert would have a far better answer to that. But I definitely think more trial and more experiences and more opportunities, these young people, and I don't have to tell you, they're thirsting for it.
Well, no, thank you very much. I don't want to go over time, but in workforce development, the average age of our students is 34 and they have work experience. So about half of the student population at MC is actually in non-credit courses and they're business related. So I thought that it was interesting for you to raise that as this very, very specific issue that is determining a lot of where people want to go in this great resignation, because they really want to be able to see themselves moving forward. And so I appreciate what you said, because that completely reinforced everything we're hearing too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lowell, I'm not sure if you're still with us. Are you?
Yeah, I am, but I think my internet is really problematic. I don't know if you can hear me, Gigi, but
I can
you
hear
hear
you
me?
perfectly. I can hear you perfectly.
Okay,
And,
sorry about that. Well, I
nope.
think we kept John longer than we promised. I think we've kept him an extra 20 minutes. So I don't know if we have one last question or if that's it. But John, great appreciation for taking the time. Your data just really hits home for all of us.
My question
Thank
for
you.
John would be, if I could, Mr. Chairman, is just to say,
Please.
John, so parting thoughts, like what's next? So what should we be watching for? Because you asked a bunch of new questions. Since I follow your reports closely, I did think that those last couple of slides were really, some very important issues you raised. And so just wondering if you can give us a sneak peek into the sort of the what's next. What should we be watching for? This is a moment in time. So what are we looking for as indicators of this trend line? Will it continue or not? That sort of thing. And what else are you going to be looking at, if you can share?
Yeah. So I know less about the future, but I know the questions we're going to ask in the future. But a couple of the hot stories that we're working on is we are really interested in if there's a new evolution of freedom that's sort of emerging that could cut across political ideology. And we just see that in a lot of our data. Pent-up demand, frustrations with mask mandates, frustrations with vaccine mandates. But now it's not just based on politics. It's suburban moms and some Democrats and people are just sort of questioning, how much of an overreach and overprotection are people past that. So we're going to try to get into those questions in the coming week and see what we can find out.
Yeah, I did see some articles sort of, a little in that direction the last couple of days. So I think, I think there's some big questions. One I think was titled, took certain groups, 50 years late for the big revolution, then they finally showed up. Our generation did a lot. Now some people are finally getting there. But you certainly have been with us longer than what we asked for and what you committed to. And we're really grateful to you. And I want to thank you for an amazing presentation. And thank you, Lowell, for bringing us together with John, even really a year ago when we first met with you, a little longer than that. And I want to thank all of our board members and guests that joined us. Your time is valuable, and we are delighted that you chose to spend it with us. And so I'm going to ask everybody to join me in thanking John. And John, I hope you'll come back because we're going to need to know more. So can I get a commitment from you that you'll come back?
Absolutely, Gigi, and feel free to share our data because I know I went through it kind of quick. I had an espresso.
Good for you. And actually, do we have your permission to post this to make your presentation available?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, great. All right. And with that, I want to say thank you. And our session is concluded. I'm doing this on Lowell's behalf, but on behalf of Lowell Yoder, our chair, and our entire board of directors, thank you, John, for being with us. And thanks everybody for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.